The Allen Line Company wishes everyone a happy and prosperous 2024. Be safe out there.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
When it comes to broker-carrier agreements, there's a lot of things to watch out for. We sit down with OOIDA's Advocacy Council to discuss these contracts, what some red flags are, and what you should do to keep yourself and your business safe. From a New York Times piece that breaks down the truck parking crisis so the general public can understand it, to a proposal that calls for a truck parking facility with more than 700 spots and more, Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine drops by to brief us on all the latest truck parking news. And finally, we're into the first week of the year and starting to get some early indicators on how strong the spot market will be for January. Robert Rouse of DAT breaks down the numbers and discusses some tips for owner-operators as we head into 2024. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Let's start by taking a trip all the way back to October of last year for a look at how much freight crossed back and forth across the borders of the United States. According to the latest numbers from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, the total value of freight hauled by trucks was more than $88 billion in October. That's an increase of 7.4% from September and represents growth of nearly 6% compared to October of 2022. This October's year-to-year improvement stops a 7-month streak of losses. Cross-border freight hauled by trucks across the U.S. northern border rose by nearly 6% compared to a year earlier. At the southern border, the value of freight increased by more than 6%. Kodiak Robotics is making a splash at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. The company has unveiled what it claims is the world's first driverless-ready semi-truck. Kodiak said 2024 is the year they go completely driverless, meaning no human in the cab, with runs between Dallas and Houston slated for later this year. The sixth-generation truck is the result of 5 years of real-world testing and 5,000 loads, carried over more than 2.5 million miles. Kodiak says it features a pneumatic braking system consisting of 3 individual brake actuators simultaneously controlled by Kodiak's proprietary software and a dual redundant steering system. The entire truck, in fact, has redundancies and backup systems meant to take over if the others fail. The company claims the truck is designed to be safer than a truck with a human driver, but the general public is skeptical for good reason. We've seen what happened with Cruise robotaxis in San Francisco recently. The company grounded their entire fleet after a series of incidents involving emergency vehicles and pedestrians. Proponents of autonomous technology claim driverless trucks don't face the same problems because they operate on fixed highway routes and do less stopping and going in traffic. Regardless, Kodiak appears determined to follow through with its plans, using this sixth-generation truck as a launch point. Meanwhile, freeway users in Phoenix, Arizona will soon be seeing more vehicles without drivers. Waymo says it will begin testing its fully autonomous taxis in the coming weeks. It's a progression of services for the ride-hailing company. They've been testing autonomous vehicles in Arizona with safety drivers on board for more than 5 years now. Waymo says its new service will be phased in, first with employees, then to beta testers, and finally to the general public. Another U.S. lawmaker has signed on to support a bipartisan bill dedicated to the truck parking shortage. Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania is the 14th co-sponsor of the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act in the Senate. Introduced last March, the bill seeks to funnel $755 million over a 3-year period into truck parking projects nationwide. There is a companion bill with the same language over in the U.S. House. It has 44 co-sponsors right now. To get your elected representatives in Congress on board, check out the fightingfortruckers.com website. You'll find a one-stop shop there for reaching out. Officials in British Columbia are calling upon the federal government to help close loopholes in the current safety certification model that allows carriers to circumvent provincial enforcement efforts. In December, BC's Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure announced increased fines and penalties for carriers involved in crashes involving infrastructure, such as bridges. 2 weeks later, the province followed through, suspending the safety certificate of Chohan freight forwarders after the carrier's 6th infrastructure crash within the past 2 years. With their fleet of 65 vehicles grounded in BC, the company turned to its Alberta trucks to keep freight moving, and current regulations allow them to do that. Because the firm operates in Alberta as a separate entity, the provincial suspension did not apply to that fleet, allowing Chohan to continue operating in British Columbia. This week, BC's Minister of Transport and Infrastructure, Rob Fleming, sent a letter to the federal Minister of Transport asking for help closing the loophole. Fleming said a very small minority of companies are creating huge problems for road safety and causing damage to infrastructure, and as such, collaboration between all levels of government is necessary to hold those organizations accountable. Homicide detectives in Nashville are investigating the shooting death of a trucker. Authorities say 37-year-old David White was found dead Monday inside the cab of his truck, which was parked near a travel stop on Lucas Lane. Nashville police say that White was last seen buying food at the truck stop around 7:20 p.m. on Sunday. No other information has been released. If you know or saw something, call Nashville Crime Stoppers at 615-742-7463. A truck stop in Tennessee that shut down nearly 3 years ago following a fire has reopened. The Tennessean Truck and Travel Stop off Interstate 65 in Cornersville opened its doors back up last week with several new features for customers, such as a full-service cocktail bar, ice cream shop, and more. The truck stop first opened back in 1974. Missouri lawmakers are once again trying to give truckers more rights when they feel they were overcharged for a non-consensual tow. Current state law in the Show Me state does not allow for complaints in such a situation, but a new bill would change that, providing trucking operators protections that are already in place in other states. Itemized receipts are one example. The ability to file a petition in court asserting that property was unjustly taken or withheld is another. The effort has the support of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association and the Missouri Trucking Association. However, similar bills have passed the state legislature in recent years, only to be vetoed by current Governor Mike Parson, who has said there are adequate towing protections already in place. A small town in upstate New York is banning commercial trucks from all its roads. The new rule in the village of Liverpool takes effect Monday, January 15th. Any truck, tractor, or tractor-trailer with a total gross weight of 5 tons or more are effectively being banned from any street, road, or highway in the town. City leaders put the ordinance into effect after bridge strikes and after an Amazon warehouse opened nearby, which led to more truck traffic. The fine for violating the rule is steep. The minimum fine is $1,200. The maximum fine is $4,700. PS Logistics is expanding again. The company has announced the acquisition of Alabama-based Buddy Moore Trucking, along with its flatbed, dedicated dry van, and brokerage operations. PS Logistics says Buddy Moore will operate as a standalone division of its company. This is just PS Logistics' latest acquisition. Since 2016, the company has acquired more than 24 trucking operations and 5 non-asset logistics operations across the United States. And finally, Trucker Path is out with its annual list of top truck stops nationwide. And for the second year in a row, the Quick Star in Davenport, Iowa takes home the top spot. Discount Truck Parking in Pompano Beach, Florida, and Workman's Travel Center in Ozark, Arkansas came in second and third. Rounding out the top 5 overall, Compass Travel Center in DeMott, Indiana, and Burt's Travel Plaza in Wellsville, Kansas. Trucker Path ranked the top 100 truck stops in the U.S. using more than 34 million in-app ratings and reviews over the past 12 months. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. OOIDA is offering an online version of its Truck to Success seminar. The 3-day in-depth training offers step-by-step guidance for truckers considering becoming owner-operators or moving onto their own authority. We'll have a link to where you can take the course at our website, landlinenow.com. Next, Ashley Blackford talks with OOIDA's Advocacy Council about broker-carrier agreements. Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine drops by to brief us on all the latest truck parking news, and we'll find out what the indicators are for January's spot market from DAT. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Paul Torlina joins me now. He is part of the Government Affairs Department at OOIDA. Paul, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, today we are going to be discussing broker-carrier agreements. And of course, I will start off by saying not legal advice, right?
Correct. This is a discussion of issues to provide information to our listeners and maybe help you work through with that information how you can handle disputes or just what to be on the lookout for.
Any questions that arise throughout this, obviously you encourage people to contact legal counsel if that's something they think they might need?
Absolutely. Anytime you have a doubt in your mind about whether you should be represented, go get yourself representation from your own attorney.
Now, when it comes to broker-carrier agreements, there are times when these agreements can have many provisions in them that are unfavorable. Some even conflict with the law. Can you walk me through what some of the unfavorable terms might be in a broker-carrier agreement?
There can be several, depending on which company you're dealing with, but the kind of universal ones that I see when I'm looking at broker-carrier agreements or that our business services division talks to people about every day. Number one is the automatic renewal that is typically in a broker-carrier agreement. It's probably in every contract that exists these days, but broker-carrier agreements can be a little bit different because they give you a very small window in some of them in which you can cancel. And if you take no action, you have an automatic renewal on your hands. For many people, that's great. They don't have to do anything. It's business as usual. They go for another year. That's usually what the term looks like, is that you sign up for a year, and then if you don't cancel in the window provided in the agreement, it just auto-renews for another year. Like I said, for the most part, that's great for people who have a good arrangement. They just want it to keep going. They have to take no action. It's very easy. But if you're on the other side and you're locked in with a broker who maybe has engaged in some practices that have gone against you or worse, you have to be aware of that window and know exactly what it is. Sometimes it's a period between 120 and 90 days before expiration. Sometimes it's 30 to 60 days. It varies depending on what the agreement is. But that's really kind of the easy one to say that's unfavorable when something has gone bad. There are certainly other ones. The one that I would say is more concerning to me that we see most regularly here at OOIDA is a provision that allows the broker to offset against a carrier whenever they have a claim for cargo damage or equipment damage or anything along those lines. Where that really comes into play, and I think the best example that I can give recently that I've seen is we had a driver pick up a trailer that was not his. He took pictures of it before he even hitched it to his truck. And he said, okay, I've got some damage up here on the front corner. I've got some damage along the side rail. And I took a picture of the front axle on the trailer of the condition of the tires. He thinks he's protecting himself. He's documented this pre-existing damage.
Yep.
And at the end of the story, the broker sends him a bill for damage to the trailer once the load has been delivered. And they're saying, look, we got you for about $1,300 here in trailer damage.
Oh, wow.
And so the driver says, well, I was smart. I took pictures. Here's what I got. The things that you're claiming the damage on, they were already there. You can clearly see it in these pictures. I took them on my phone. They've got a date stamp. You clearly don't have a claim for that. Well, I mentioned the front axle on the trailer for a reason. The broker claimed damage to the rear axle tires, and unfortunately our guy did not have any pictures of the rear tires. So they said, that's fine. You've got a point with the damage on the trailer, on the front corner, and on the side rail, but those tires were damaged while you were towing the load on the rear axle. We got you for about $800 for 4 tires. What could he do about it? He couldn't do a thing. He has nothing he can do about it because he didn't take pictures of the rear axle and the front axle. And with the technology we have these days, that's an easy thing to do to protect yourself from these offsets. But the sad story is he got offset for $800 because he couldn't prove it.
Yeah.
So we look at the contract, and there's actually a provision in there that says the broker is authorized to offset. Now, under the law, There's something called the Carmack Amendment out there that says any claims for cargo damage or equipment damage have a specific step and process that you go through to send documentation to the carrier. Carrier reviews it, has a chance to reject the claim. It's all in the federal regulations. These types of provisions circumvent that. They're an end around. They say, you know what? The broker has the right to do this. We don't care what the Carmack Amendment says. You owe us $800.
Wow.
So those are the kind of things that we want people to be on the lookout for. One other unfavorable term is with respect to refrigerated loads. We've seen produce examples lately where a load will get loaded onto a truck, delivered on time. The reefer equipment on the trailer operated normally through the entire process. It gets to the destination. Someone breaks the seal at the destination on the trailer, and they determine that the contents were not kept at the proper temperature. How is that the driver's fault? The driver's picking up a sealed trailer. He's not inspecting it. He's hauling it. He's on time. His equipment doesn't malfunction. He gets to the destination. It's still sealed. Someone breaks the seal at the receiver location. Somehow that's his fault, and he gets a claim made against him for something he had no control over. Now, this has gotten much worse since COVID because these contracts have a provision in them that say the carrier shouldn't accept any load where the probe temperature inside the trailer, inside of, let's say we got heads of lettuce that we're hauling, someone's supposed to probe that head of lettuce somewhere in there, take a few samples, and determine what the temperature is. There's a 2 degree variance that they're allowed to have. And if it exceeds that, it should be rejected and not loaded. Well, COVID has made that a near impossibility for drivers because most of the shippers and receivers say, we don't even want you physically in the building, let alone on the dock inspecting or having anything to do with that process. And we hear all the time from drivers who will take photos of those placards in receiver or shipping office windows that say, no drivers allowed on the dock or something along those lines. So what happens is we've got this agreement provision that says, here's the parameters for the temperature. You're supposed to inspect, then it gets sealed. It's supposed to be in here. Well, how can they ever do that if they can't get physical access? So that it's another unfavorable term created by circumstance. And what I would tell anybody who says, well, what can you do about that one? Insist your way onto the dock. Because if you're not there to see or observe for yourself that it was loaded at the proper temperature and in the proper setup in the trailer, I guess is the best way to describe it, you are now on the line for the first 1/10 of a mile that you drive away with that.
Wow.
And that's the contract provides for it. That's automatically a loss for you if that thing doesn't show up at the right temperature. So that's become a problem, and the best way to combat that is either get somebody to give you physical access or get somebody to give you a written statement, like an affidavit or some type of statement that says, I loaded that thing at this time and this day and it was within the proper parameters. It's a good load when you take it away. Lastly, one thing that we're starting to see a little bit more of is a limitation on rights of third parties to the agreement. So what we'll see sometimes is let's say a carrier hauls a load and the broker slow pays them. Carrier can turn over that load to a collection agency and say, you guys got it. It's all yours. Get whatever you can get for it. It's no different than when somebody has a credit card debt or a retail sales, whatever it might be out in the consumer world. There are provisions in these agreements now that are limiting a carrier's ability to do that. And we actually just had a case up in Ohio about a month ago get handed down that said that one of those provisions was invalidated against the carrier. That's probably the best way to describe that. The carrier lost in court because this provision was there, and there was another provision in the agreement that said the carrier cannot contact the broker's customers directly. So what they did was the carrier didn't get paid or got slow paid. They sold their load to a collection agency. Collection agency goes and contacts the customer of the broker. They violated that provision of the agreement, and so the court said, you violated the no contact provision, and you're a third party. You have no rights under this set of contract provisions to make any recovery at all. So those are the landmines in these agreements these days for unfavorable terms.
What are some of the provisions that conflict with the law?
Usually the two that we see are the one I mentioned previously, where we have an alternate cargo claims procedure or a equipment damage procedure that circumvents the Carmack Amendment. OOIDA's position on any of these types of unfavorable provisions that also conflict with the law is that they're just not enforceable. They would not be considered part of the contract. The other one that we see that we've been fighting at the FMCSA level and trying to get it changed from the top down is almost every one of these broker-carrier agreements I see these days has a provision in it that says you waive your right to any documentation that might be available in the possession of the broker. There is a specific federal regulation that says exactly the opposite of that. It says that you are entitled to documentation relating to the load that you're hauling. A lot of the fight this current cycle that we're kind of seeing is with regard to rates on loads. Drivers want to know what the broker's making. They want to know the difference between what the broker's getting and what they're getting. But more importantly, and I'm not trying to minimize the rates by any means, but more importantly to me, or what I see, or what our business services department sees, is when there are claim damage to equipment or damage to cargo processes that are in place. So when we get those claim processes, we should be able to, as drivers, ask for documentation about that load. It kind of goes back to the example about the tires. Can someone show me pictures of that rear axle of the tires? Oh, you don't have documentation for that. Well, I'm entitled to that under this regulation. And a lot of times the carrier will say, well, no, you waive the right to that. You don't have a right to that documentation anymore.
What do you suggest someone does when they get a contract or agreement?
Well, the first thing I would always tell you is have a lawyer review it and flag any unfavorable terms for you. Negotiate those unfavorable terms. Get them out of the agreement if you can. Now, I just said two things that as a lawyer are always my kind of go-to for somebody is, hey, go get your own lawyer, negotiate that stuff out. In the real world, these brokers will tell you in 1 second to get lost if you want to negotiate those agreements or negotiate out provisions that are not favorable to them. So if you're unable to do those things, you have to be proactive on your own. Number one, be aware of all things that are unfavorable in those agreements while you're dealing with the broker. And I know you're out on the road driving. There's other things on your mind like safety and delivery times and things like that are important, but you also have to keep those on your mind. It's a running clock on your business at all times. Number two, document everything we can. We talked about the example of taking photos of the trailer and the equipment. Make sure you're being thorough about it. Like I said, if you can get someone to write down or attest to the fact that they loaded a load in a certain condition, that's going to be more helpful than you having nothing at all or only having a bill of lading to work off of. Get physical access to anything that you can as the load is being either loaded or unloaded. If you can get on the dock, if you can get in the office, whatever it might be, if you can get photos of things as they're going in and coming out. I understand that's probably different than what a lot of people have done over the years, but this is your best way. Information is always your best way to combat these problems. Lastly, demand documentation whenever you can. And when I say demand, I don't mean just tell somebody, hey, I need some documents. We also have what we call a demand form on the OOIDA website, fightingfortruckers.com. It's available to members, and they can access that form and use it. Membership is less than $50 with OOIDA. If you get some benefit out of this form 1 or 2 times, you've already paid for legal fees you didn't have to pay for just by having that, not to mention the many other benefits to membership with OOIDA.
All right. Paul, thank you very much for all the information.
You bet.
If you have any questions, you can contact OOIDA at 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now, 855-976-4291.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy when your truck on a CAT scale.
A blank space on many maps with the distance between parking spaces seemingly as great as infinity. It is the boundary that separates safety and security from the dangers of the road. the space between electronic signs and a place in which to rest. It is not a dimension of the imagination, but instead the reality faced by truck drivers every single day. It is a place we call the parking zone. Here are your guides for this journey into parking news, good and bad, Scott Thompson and Tyson Fisher.
Thanks, Mark. Tyson, good to see you.
Good to be here.
Let's start with a cover story in the New York Times dedicated to the very issue you cover on a daily basis, Tyson. The title of this one, America's Truckers Face a Chronic Headache Finding Parking, end quote there. Sounds familiar. I have some thoughts on this, and I think they did a pretty good job of encapsulating the issues that we all know about. But just your thoughts on what you read there.
Yeah, so this came out just like a few days before Christmas, if I remember right. Yep. So everyone's on holiday break, reading the newspaper. A lot of eyes on this story. So, so my thoughts about this is, whether or not you like the New York Times, I think we can all agree that it's one of the most, if not the most influential newspapers in the United States, right? It has more than 9 million subscribers comparatively. The Wall Street Journal has the second most, at just under 4 million. So millions of people, they look at the New York Times. So when a media source with that kind of reach publishes an article on any given topic, it pushes that issue in front of, as I pointed out, millions of Americans. The point being is this is good news if, let's say, you have pending legislation before Congress that on that particular issue. So with millions of Americans now informed on the issue, it kind of puts added pressure on the lawmakers to maybe to act on any bills that may be related. So in the case of truck parking, as we all know, we have the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act. That's been floating around Congress for, most of 2023. The second time it's been there. It was reintroduced from 2022. And the thing is, we've been talking about that for, 2 years now. And it's been easy for Congress to kind of sweep that bill under the rug because, outside of the trucking industry, who cares, And that's kind of the problem that
they should care.
They should,
but
right.
They don't know enough to care, I think, is maybe the takeaway there.
Right. And so all that being said, as you pointed out, the New York Times, I think they did a great job of highlighting all the main points that, OOIDA and other stakeholders have been shouting for years. And for example, they pointed out that there's one trucking parking space for every 11 truckers. They mentioned the financial cost to truckers, the safety cost to all motorists, including fatal crashes. They even mentioned the hours of service and ELDs, how those have made exacerbated the truck parking problem. All this stuff is mentioned. And so it's a great messaging for the trucking industry. Again, had the New York Times talk about this. And so, back to what I just said, it's like, who cares? Well, no one has really cared outside the industry because they just simply do not know. So to have the New York Times publish a big piece about that, it gets that information out there.
Yeah, and it's extensive reporting too. And I was in South Dakota at a truck parking event with the Secretary of Transportation, Todd Spencer. The president of OOIDA was there as well. And this reporter was there in South Dakota as part of this story that we see here. And it's refreshing because this reporter obviously is talking to a lot of people and doing what reporters do and, asking questions and getting answers and putting it all together to tell a story here. And as you mentioned there, by and large, the story is there is a problem and everything that OOIDA and other groups have been talking about, and there are plenty of them out there, about the problem and how to fix the problem, all of that is in this article here. So as you point out, it is a refreshing look, I think, from a different point of view, but coming to the same conclusion that everybody else has basically come to. And hopefully we'll see some action out of this, and eyeballs, as you said, get on this story, and maybe we'll see some progress.
Yeah, that's my hope, is they'll just reignite enthusiasm for the bill and then get it closer to the finish line.
We'll keep an eye on that, and, our obligatory reminder to reach out to your representative and make sure that they are aware of the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act in both the House and the Senate, because lawmakers are busy. They don't know every single bill that's out there, but educate them, let them know why this is important. Hopefully we'll see some traction here in 2024. Let's move on down the list here, Tyson. Some positive developments out of Northern California, where we've got a new truck parking facility off Interstate 5, I believe, in the works, and this is a big one. Really big one.
Yeah. Surprised to see how big this one is.
Yeah.
So here coming up on January 18th, the San Joaquin County Planning Commission in California, they are going to consider a 34-acre project that calls for a facility that will provide 711 truck parking spaces. 711.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. That'll be in Lathrop, California, which is just east of San Francisco. According to the Manteca Bulletin, the facility would be located just south of the Interstate 5 Roth Road interchange, which, by the way, that's the primary access to the Union Pacific Railroad intermodal facility. So that's why we're seeing this huge parking facility.
Yeah.
So apparently, what's happening with that Union Pacific facility is that it's undergoing a huge expansion. And according to that Manteca Bulletin report, that expansion will increase capacity from 280,000 truck trips per year to about 730,000.
Wow.
So there's going to be
tripling almost.
Yeah. So there's going to be a huge surge in truck traffic, obviously.
Yeah.
And then, as we pointed out, truck parking, staging when it comes to shippers and receivers, that's kind of a problem when it comes to truck parking. This will hopefully solve a lot of this will prevent some problems that would come in the future with this facility.
Yeah, kudos to them for thinking about this before they get too far down the line. So kudos to that planning commission. This is, I think, is it just a plan right now, right? We're still waiting to get approval and all that stuff?
That's correct. And I also like to point out that this project actually stems from a San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors directive to address the issue of illegal truck parking countywide. So this is something that they knew about. They recognized the truck parking problem, and they actively decided they're going to do something. And so they kind of called for stakeholders to say, "Hey, come in, make some bids, give us some project proposals, and we'll see what happens."
And I think the plan, this would be a few years, right, before this thing went in. But we'll keep an eye on that. And again, being proactive and trying to stem a problem before it really gets big there in Northern California. We always talk about one door opening and another door closing.
Right.
In this case, it's a few rest areas in northwestern Ohio that are closing, but only temporarily.
Correct. So I think there's a total of 3. So beginning here, this is actually pretty soon, beginning January 11th, the Ohio Department of Transportation will close both the east and westbound rest areas along US 30 near the city of Convoy, not too far from the Indiana border. The plan calls for the replacement of all existing buildings and resurfaced parking areas. So what's going to happen is those rest areas will be completely closed with barricades. That includes the parking lots. So that closure is expected to last for about a year. In addition to that closure, by the way, each rest area has about 10 truck parking spaces. So not a huge loss, but still,
every little bit makes a difference.
Absolutely. Also, there's and by the way, the closest rest area on US 30 is about 30 miles east in Lima, Ohio. So you don't really have to go too far to find some more truck parking. So that's the good news on that front.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, in the upper Sandusky rest area on US 23 will be closed for the same time period. Again, truck parking spots, but there's another rest area about 15 minutes north on US 23 in Cary, Ohio. So hopefully, it's not going to cause too many problems, but just kind of be aware of those closures and then, plan accordingly.
Well, and in an ideal world, they would temporarily shut these down for renovations and then open them back up with more truck parking spaces. I'm not sure what the plan is here. And we have seen, some states do that over recent years. But again, you're talking maybe 30 spots. Doesn't seem like a lot, but it sure does make a difference for the people that depend on those truck parking spots on a regular basis. So they'll have to make other plans there. Let's move on here to King Mountain, North Carolina. There is a truck stop there, or I guess was a truck stop there, that was destroyed, unfortunately, in a fire earlier this month.
Yeah, so this one's a big loss. It's called the Kings Mountain Travel Center in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. It burst up in flames.
Yeah.
As of this conversation, there's really no cause that's been disclosed. But the big takeaway here is that more than 70 truck parking spaces were included at that truck stop. Those are no longer available. That travel center was located off Interstate 85 near Exit 5, about 30 miles west of Charlotte. So, if that was a truck stop that you kind of regularly went to or relied on for truck parking going to Charlotte, again, make some different plans because that is no longer available.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to New York State now. And we actually had a conversation with Chris Bauer, who is with the Capital Region Transportation Council. They recently looked at the truck parking situation in northern New York State, upstate New York. And the study was really comprehensive. I went through it, and I know you did as well, Tyson. Your takeaways from what you saw there, I guess the good news is that the problem isn't really a huge problem in that area, but the takeaway is they're actually looking at the issue. Yeah,
I was surprised. It was more than 200 pages, that study, and which it was just nice to see. So it was really comprehensive. So really, let's just get down to the recommendations here. What they recommended was they want to seek opportunities to expand truck parking along the Interstate 90 corridor just east of the Hudson River. Also to seek opportunities for more truck parking in the vicinity of Interstate 90, Interstate 88 interchange. So that's kind of the area where they're looking for more truck parking. They also want potential new truck parking at New York State Thruway service areas, which I thought was a kind of a good idea as well. Also, expand truck parking in existing rest areas. These are all things that we see across the state, or across the country and other states. But another thing I thought was interesting was they want to develop emergency truck parking plan for the region. This is something that's somewhat new to me. I haven't really seen this much. For example, they would the plan would kind of set up impromptu parking areas in the event of inclement weather, as we're seeing across the nation right now. So it would pretty much establish areas where you can't normally park, but if there's again inclement weather or a major traffic incident, they would say, hey, all right, you could park over here now and kind of wait this one out and see what happens. So and another thing that they pointed out, and again, we're talking about how shippers and receivers and whatnot don't usually allow truck parking. They want to develop a formal municipal guidance regarding the incorporation of truck parking into industrial site approvals. So if there's a warehouse that wants to be in the area, the city would be like, all right, what's the truck parking situation? Which I think was a great idea that every city needs to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as I told Chris Bauer when we talked, when I look at these studies, I always look to make sure that they have talked to commercial truck drivers when putting these things together, and they have, and they did, and they continue those discussions.
Absolutely.
So that's very important that they're getting that feedback and actually doing something about it. So we'll leave on that encouraging note. Right. Tyson, it's a pleasure as always, and we'll keep watching your coverage on Landline.media.
Great for having me.
Our thanks to Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine. You can get the latest on any and all truck parking news courtesy of Tyson on our website, again, Landline.media, and in every issue of Landline Magazine. We're out of time for the moment, but don't turn that dial. There's more Landline Now to come.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit Howe'sProducts.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, where's the freight going to be and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now senior correspondent Ashley Blackford will bring us answers to both of those important questions with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Ashley now with the report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello once again to Robert Rouse, the DAT. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great, Ashley. Thanks for asking.
Now, starting off, let's take a look at last week. How did the spot market perform?
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of weeks in the spot market. After a pretty less than stellar year, we saw a lot of carriers continue to take time off last week. So it's been really hard to read too much into the week over week comparisons of the loaded truck volumes in the spot market. But that said, last week we saw around 671,000 loads on the DAT load board. With this week being the first full week of the new year, we should start to be getting early indicators on how strong January will actually be when we talk next week. When we get the number of trucks on the DAT load board, was pretty strong at 199,000 trucks last week, which was actually stronger than 2019 and 2018. One of the interesting things that we're monitoring is we're seeing a lot of long-haul capacity continue to exit, but for every 10 that leave, 8 new authorities join the industry. So, we're looking to see if those new that are joining are actually joining the spot market, or are they doing something different? So definitely something that we're watching as far as capacity goes. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market, last week we saw loaded truck ratios actually increase for all 3 equipment types. As I said last week, this is helpful information, but it'll be really more helpful when we start to see what the Q1 numbers start to tell us over the next couple weeks. But if we look at reefer freight, which is actually going pretty good, load post volumes were just over 60% lower than last year. And that's impacted by about 13% fewer produce loads from the 19 growing regions tracked by the USDA. And carrier equipment posts are about 30% lower than last year as well. And that resulted in last week's reefer loaded truck ratio starting in 2024 at 5.4, which is almost half of what it was in 2023. So something we're watching. And lastly, when we look at rates, we saw national benchmark broker-to-carrier spot rates without fuel decrease for all 3 equipment types. Reefer line haul rates ended 2023 at $2.18 per mile, following a late surge before the break, where rates jumped by about 19 cents per mile the week before Christmas. Since then, those spot rates have lost about half of that gain and ended last week at $2.11 per mile. With fuel, it's about $2.59 per mile, which is around 5 cents per mile lower than it was the week prior. And then dry van line haul rates ended 2023 at just over $1.75 cents per mile, and almost precisely where our RateCast forecast line haul rates predicted they'd be. So since then, spot rates have actually decreased by about 3 cents per mile, down to $1.73 per mile, and about $2.17 per mile with fuel.
While we expect a slow first quarter, what other impacts of the supply chain should owner-operators be aware of?
Yeah, well, the U.S. truck market was slow over the last month or so with our winter holidays here in the U.S. There's one country that has a major holiday that impacts the global supply chain every year, and that's the Chinese New Year. This year is the Year of the Dragon, and it will be happening very soon and have a major impact on Q1. The first quarter, or the quiet season in freight, is also impacted by a slowdown in Asian imports. Except in 2020, February import volumes are typically the low point each year before picking up in March and then steadily increasing all the way to October, when import volumes usually peak for the remainder of the year. According to IHS Markit, February volumes decreased about 20% compared to January due to the Chinese New Year and the closing of all the factories. This year's celebrations will last up to 16 days, but only the first 7 days are actually considered a public holiday. That's going to be from February 10th all the way to February 16th. The Chinese New Year is celebrated by more than 20% of the world and is one of the most important holidays in China. and to the Chinese people all over. Traditionally, the week before and after the week-long festival is set aside so family members can travel home from the New Year's dinner. This effectively shuts down most factories for about 3 weeks, and it results in a drop in import volumes, especially on the Trans-Pacific trade lane, North America's most prominent trade lane, actually. Imports from Asia on the Trans-Pacific Ocean shipping lane accounted for 68% of November's total import volume, and just over half coming from Northeast Asia, where the ports of Yantian, Shanghai, and Ningbo account for 54% of imports into the Los Angeles and Long Beach ports, which received about 50% of their 20-foot equivalent units from Northeast Asia last month, impacting load truck demand in Southern California the most during the Chinese New Year. So as we get closer to the end of the month and into February, it'll be important to know that some of these typically strong port markets will have less freight due to the Chinese New Year.
And as we start the new year, what tips do you have for owner-operators in 2024?
Yeah, the other day I was talking with a carrier about how they're handling the current market conditions, and even the market has been pretty tough. They told me that they've been able to stay pretty profitable by really understanding their numbers. As a business owner, understanding your costs are so crucial to being able to survive in any market. The good news is that all owner operators will need to be pulling all of their 2023 expense receipts together so that they can do their taxes. And that makes it a great time to be able to start creating a profit and loss worksheet. You just need a pen and pad of paper to get started. It makes it pretty easy and low cost for everybody. The first step would be to write down all of your expenses for each month and the amounts. This helps you really understand where you're spending your money. A lot of times there's some unknowns there that you may not have realized, man, I was spending more in one specific place. After you have all of your expenses, you want to split them into 2 sections, fixed and variable expenses. Fixed expenses are things like truck payments, insurance payments, trailer payments, essentially any expense that's the same each month. These are usually less controllable expenses as it's highly dependent on the provider of that service. You could shop around to kind of reduce some of those, but a lot of times it's pretty fixed. The variable expenses are things like fuel, maintenance, and food. Those are what you have control over the most, and those are really what you want to focus on. Anything that you could kind of tweak a little bit to ensure that you're profitable. Lastly, you want to write down the revenue and number of miles driven for each month. All you have to do to really understand profit and loss is take your total revenue minus your total expenses for that month, and that's going to get you either a profit or a loss for that specific month. When you get your gross profit or loss for that month, that's going to tell you something really important. And another great number that you also want to make sure you have as well is if you take that profit or loss and divide it by the number of miles that you drove in a specific month, that's going to give you your profit and loss all the way down to the per mile level. And that's a really good indicator of what months are going to be higher and what months are going to be lower. And typically, even in a down market, you're going to see seasonality be fairly similar. And that's going to help you better understand, okay, I'm probably not going to profit as much in, maybe April or May or whatever month for your specific business. And then you need to prepare for that specific outcome so that way you can stay profitable throughout the rest of the year.
If our listeners want more information, where can they go for that?
Yeah, you can get the latest rate information at dat.com/trendlines or look for our weekly market updates on the DAT blog. They're published every Wednesday.
All right, Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley.
That was Robert Rouse with DAT. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
chrome.
And I am
I am
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.